We have had scandals in American history, and we have had false alarms, and we have had catastrophes that were badly mishandled by the authorities. And usually there's an attempt to learn some lessons out of it. So let's take, for example, the Vietnam War resulted in the War Powers Resolution, which basically said, let's be very careful before we get in these military adventures. Watergate caused Congress to pass all kinds of laws, including the Freedom of Information Act. Iran-Contra resulted in some new restrictions on the government, the Johnstown flood. Now, the point I want to make here is that COVID seems to be the opposite, because anyone who looks back at COVID, and let's be, charitable about motives here. Let's just say that this pandemic came out of nowhere. No one quite knew the extent of the damage. And so there were all kinds of restrictions that were imposed that were very draconian. And now that we look back on it, we see that a lot of the propaganda was false. A lot of people were censored for saying things that were not false, but true. They imposed restrictions that turned out to be meaningless. And so you're censoring people for saying things that are now known to be accurate. And that is that masks have very limited effectiveness, that you stick a piece of cloth on your face and it doesn't really prevent a germ from getting in or getting out. Or take the vaccine. The vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. It doesn't prevent you from transmitting COVID. So if we had known all those things before, presumably we wouldn't have had this kind of a totalitarian, tyrannical, overzealous, whatever you want to call it, response to COVID. So you might expect that the authorities in the United States and abroad would be going, let's learn some valuable lessons here about governmental overreach, about jumping to conclusions, about making claims about science that are not actually supported by science. But no, interestingly, you see efforts all across the government to strengthen the authority of government so government can act even more arbitrarily the next time. There is a group that's called the Uniform Law Commission, ULC. And this is kind of one of those sort of shadowy groups. And its job appears to be something that's fairly innocent, which is, hey, listen, we have state laws on different matters, and they often are out of sync with each other, or they're contradictory. And so something is a crime over here, but not a crime over there. It's treated it is a crime in both places, but treated one way over here, another way over there. What about if we try to make an effort to get these state laws to be somewhat more consistent or harmonious with one another? Because after all, we all live in the same country. But this group that has this kind of a seemingly innocuous job is apparently pushing aggressively for something called the Model Public Health Emergency Authority Act. And what is that? That's basically an act which says that executive authority, both at the state level and the federal level, should be unleashed to the extreme when there is any kind of a pandemic or emergency. And it is the executive officials themselves who get to say what is a pandemic and what is an emergency. So think about it this way. Right now we have separation of powers, we have balance of power. So at the state level, it means that the governor has authority, but not unlimited authority. It's the authority that he gets from the state legislature. But imagine if the governor has the right to say, I don't care what the state legislature thinks, I can act unilaterally because it's a pandemic. I can act unilaterally because it's an emergency, and the emergency can be a climate emergency. Oh, there's a fog over New York, it's coming from Canada, and even though we know that was really arson, nevertheless, I'm going to declare that it's an emergency because of climate change, and so I'm going to prevent people from getting out of their homes. I'm going to prevent people from using a gas stove. I'm going to prevent people from driving a car that has gas or oil in it. I mean, this is preposterous. And yet, it's very, as I say, the opposite lesson that we should be learning from COVID. We should be learning to be cautious about the overuse and misuse of government power. Instead, what these groups are pushing for, and now you can kind of see their agenda. For them, COVID had a silver lining, and the silver lining is it gives government the chance to do things that are not even really directly related. We want to forgive student loans. Okay, well, let's use COVID to do that. We want to protect renters and make it so they don't really have to pay their rent. Well, let's make it so that landlords can't evict tenants, even tenants who don't pay their rent. So here you have government pushing a progressive agenda that otherwise would take legislative action, that otherwise would have to operate through the normal channels. So you use these abnormal channels, you use epidemics, you use the politics of fear, and you use it in a way that gives you more and greater government control. So the net effect, if this kind of if this group called the ULC, the Uniform Law Commission, has its way, then you basically increase the authority of Biden, which we don't want to do, but you also increase the unilateral authority of governors. And again, look, there are a lot of Republican governors. Governors should have executive authority, but that authority is not unlimited. It's limited by what the legislature has empowered these governors to do. Governors, after all, are the executive branch carrying out the will of the legislature. So I am most certainly not in favor of upsetting the balance of powers in this way, particularly on emergencies and epidemics that may very often turn out to be, as COVID did, a pretext for doing things that you otherwise are not able to do.